Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call this work session on the 2019 first quarter budget revisions to order, and go ahead and start with introductions, starting with Ms. Kennedy. Felix Rivera.
Forrest Dunbar.
Austin Quinn Davidson.
Cameron Perez Verdia.
Meg Zalato.
Keith Peterson.
Christopher Conster.
All right. So we have a series of budget amendments before us for first quarter. So let's just start in the order that they are presented. And I actually would like to move amendment number 6 up, so we can discuss that with the other ones related to abatement. Which I believe are the first 3, well, the first 2, and then now number 6. So, Ms. LaFrance, I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment proposes taking $150,000 from the municipal manager's budget line that has $450,000 for the stormwater utility funding, reducing it to $300,000. The $150,000 would provide for one additional seasonal 6-person crew for our homeless camp abatement, and this would be, I believe, through October. And that's about it for this one.
And quickly before we go into questions, so a variety of these budget amendments state that the funding comes from fund balance, but it's my understanding, based on the presentations from the administration, that fund balance is actually already being used for a variety of one-time expenditures, including this one. This $450,000 is, I believe, unless Mr. Wilbur can correct me, one of the uses of fund balance. So that's why we crafted this one this way, because we have to state specifically where we're taking money from. Do you have anything further to add?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Weddleton.
I have a question on that. I mean, this is fine, but you know, at the end of the year, we find out we have fund balance, which is good. Revenues are down, but spending went back up. Credit to the city. But now there's fund balance, so the administration looked at it and said, well, we'd like to do these things with it. And that was your call, but we have to make a call too. There's $600,000 fund balance, and we will go through and say, we'd like to see this. And I would say, and it's your job to refigure what is left and do your thing with it. I mean, isn't that, so, I mean, I'm okay saying take it from stormwater utility, but if we were just to say, we're using some for all of that $600,000, now you go adjust your plans. That would give you more flexibility on deciding, well, we want the full funding for the stormwater, so we'll juggle something else. So I guess the question is, which is your preference?
So I think what the administration's preference is going to be is that after we get an opportunity to hear and see all of your proposed amendments, I mean, we're going to go back and take a look to see what we've proposed, and we may make some adjustments to what we've already proposed to the Assembly through an S-version process. And so after we're done today, that will be our next step. And then the last point I would make, you know, while the fund balance, the $600,000 that we had in this year's, traditionally we have targeted those things towards one-time expenses because the fund balance is really it's a number that can vary from year to year. And we do put it into the entire pot.
So when you see this one that says 150 comes out of that stormwater utility, you say, okay, maybe you'd rather fund the stormwater utility. You feel like you have the flexibility to come back and say, okay, well, we'll put the 150 towards camp abatement, but we'd rather fully fund the stormwater utility, and we'll take that 150.
Or we may look at the estimates of the stormwater utility, adjust it a little bit, so that we may be able to accommodate it a little bit. So that would be the approach that we're going to take.
And that wouldn't bother the makers of the amendment. Your goal is to get the abatement revenues. Okay.
Thank you. So if there's no questions, let's go ahead and move on to the second camp abatement / shelter amendment. Mr. Constant.
Thank you. Similar to the first one, I want to make sure we're taking care of both sides of the equation. And Mrs. Alato's proposal towards number 6, it takes into account the third, which I kind of in my mind had included in there, but we've long discussed the idea of ramping up the mobile intervention team to a 6-day team, which is more expensive than we have funds for, but we should do as much as we can. But ultimately, my desire, whatever level of funding we come up with for more intensive implementation of the homelessness response, is that we provide both services for the community, which is cleaning up and abating, and services for the individuals who are struggling to help them get connected, and that we do all of this in accord with the Constitution, which means we aren't just pushing people off the land and running them in circles. And so, to me, wherever we land, I think that 400 is the number that would give the public some confidence we're taking a look at this, and then however it's divided, as long as there's a response on helping the community feel safer and cleaner and helping these individuals move, that's what we need to do.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Peterson, and then I'm putting myself in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, you know, since the alcohol tax failed in the vote by mail election, you know, we're going to have to make some adjustments because we've heard from members of the community that some of them feel we're not doing anything to try to solve the homelessness situation. Those of us who have been on the assembly for a while realize that's not the case, but visually there's still numerous camps out there, and people are feeling afraid to use our parks and trails, and that's one of the best amenities we have here in Anchorage. And so we do need to continue to do all we can do to see if we can, you know, start reducing the number of homeless. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. So my questions were on the $200,000 for overflow shelter. Is there a sense, and I don't know, Mr. Constant, if you have the answers or if someone from the administration does, of the number of shelter beds needed, and would this funding meet that need?
So I did not hear from Ms. Burke, our homeless coordinator, a specific number of beds that were needed, but I did hear from her a specific number, and I exceeded that number in this proposal to a degree, so that it would not only accomplish what she stated was her goal, but would also maybe do a little more. And so, perfect timing.
You say her name and she appears.
You know what that means.
Yeah, you should be in the hot seat.
That's a pretty good trick, dude.
Yeah, exactly.
So, there's one other thing that I didn't include in here, but I would like to suggest at some point we, and this might sound crazy, but approve some funding for some positive storytelling, a marketing campaign that shares with the community the actual work that's being done. Because it's hard to combat the perception that we're doing nothing with just us saying, look at all we're doing. And so that isn't really here, but it's a conversation I think we should contemplate through the committee at some point, because if we don't tell the story, no one will, and we're just going to get beat up.
Thank you, Mr. Constant, for that response. So the second point I wanted to make was regarding shelter, what our larger vision for shelter is. And that's not necessarily something that this amendment can address, but I think that's something that we need to have, perhaps in the homelessness committee meeting, is to have that discussion.
But Mr. Rivera, since you asked the previous question and she showed up, the question was, do you have a sense of the need from the perspective of overflow shelter through the season, from a cost perspective or a bed perspective, and would $200,000 be sufficient?
I'll address the numbers. The numbers we used and looked at this year was between 100 and 125 spaces needed for overflow. And that changes in the summer because some people go out and do seasonal jobs, or there's some fluidity in the population. But that's the number that we have that's consistent, and so that gives us a sense of the amount that we need. 200,000 would buy us maybe 3 months worth of, if we extended our current contract of operations. Because at this point we don't have a facility, we don't have a way to tap into other resources like we've done with the main overflow contract in years past. We would get just a small benefit from that 200,000.
Which is different than what I understood from previous.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. So I have Ms. Zolotel, Mr. Perez-Verdia, and Mr. Dunbar.
I have my question answered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Zolotel. Mr. Perez-Verdia.
I don't have it in front of me. So, but what is the, based on the first quarter adjustments? What is the assumed balance of fund balance? What is the balance of fund balance that we're basing this on?
The unrestricted
Yeah.
amount of fund balance is
Right.
600,000.
Okay, and so, and I don't know if this is correct or not, but I recall when the budget was approved that there was a balancing of the budget based on the assumption that the permanent fund would be funded at this maximum level, and that was going to bring in additional revenue to the municipality to balance the budget. Is that still the assumption that we're basing this budget on?
So we are basing the budget based on a permanent fund dividend of $2,500.
Oh, okay. So it's not based on the 6,000.
It is not.
Okay, thanks. And so based on that assumption, that that brings in additional revenue to the municipality. And I guess I can talk with you offline. But what I'm trying to ascertain is if the assumption is that we have a $600,000 fund balance. That's based on partly on the assumption that we're going to receive a certain number.
No. The amount that we get from the permanent fund, we make a calculation about the amount of delinquent fines and
Right,
fees that we
that's
receive.
what I'm
I think
referring to.
it's basically identified as a revenue stream inside all of the
I see.
140
Okay.
revenues.
Okay, great.
Hundreds
Thanks.
of revenues that we look at.
That was it. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Perez-Verdia. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you. So I guess a question and then a statement. Mr. Briggs, so you said it gives 3 more months of overflow capacity potentially. How many months do we currently have?
October 1 through April 30.
Okay. So that actually is sort of encouraging to me because historically overflow was only necessary in the winter. But I remember from last summer, or perhaps the summer before that, we started need overflow during the summer as well, right?
We've had the ability to do overflow, and there's one organization that doesn't receive any public funding who's continuously done that. That's the women being sheltered at the downtown Hope Center.
Okay.
But for adults, we've historically and currently have more need than we have spaces available winter and summer, but
Right.
we've just kind of gotten by in the summer. There's less of a concern about people dying from exposure.
Sure, but I mean, so I think this gets to sort of a legal and moral question. And it's the reason why I'm much more likely, although I appreciate what all the sponsors here are trying to do, I'm more likely to support either Chris's version or Meg's version. Because I think, so there's a moral aspect to this and there's a legal aspect to this. The moral aspect of this, to me, is if we are increasing abatement funds and aggressively going in and getting people out of the camps, knowing full well they have nowhere to go, I think we've set ourselves up to be, we are not acting ethically, in my opinion. And I don't mean that like in a legal sense. I mean, just to me, it just feels wrong to know that we are getting people out of the camps with nowhere to go.
We're not allowed to do that.
It's illegal.
And that's what I'm bringing to my second point. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Great introduction. The legal issue to this, right? That we have been told again and again by the Ninth Circuit and others, not just us, but a lot of jurisdictions all over the country, especially the West Coast, that you cannot do this, that you cannot just send people out of the camps without a place to go. And so maybe it's only 3 months, but the 3 months are June, July, August, and that's also the 3 months that we are most aggressively abating camps. Then there's a logic to that. And so I'm still working through this, but it leads me to think that Chris or Meg's approach is more appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Constant.
It would be probably May, June, and July, because we wouldn't want to wait to ramp up as we ramp up the abatement teams and all of that. So we would do it probably continuously from whenever we start until the resources aren't available. And I would like to speak to that moral and ethical issue that we face. And I would say with this administration and this assembly, it's not that we've been called out. I think we've been studiously effective at respecting the civil rights of the individuals all across the board. And so it's not just a restriction, it's a core value that we do the right thing. And that requires that if and when we're abating, we are also ensuring they have somewhere to go. So it's not just a barrier, it's from the heart.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. All right, so seeing no further discussion on Mr. Constant's amendment, we're going to move to Ms. Alatel.
Thank you, Chair. This amendment is very similar to the ones we've discussed. The abatement efforts at $150,000, which should garner another 6-person crew for abatement. Overflow shelter at $200,000, which sounds like a 3-month increase. And and then the additional $50,000 or the change for $50,000 to mobile intervention. I think as we tackle this issue, I look at it as a 3-pronged stool, and we really, if we're going to be abating camps, we need places for people to go, and we also need to be hooking them in with services. And while $50,000 isn't a lot, it's enough to maybe increase contacts with mobile intervention amongst individuals to establish that rapport, make people more likely to enter into coordinated entry services. It is definitely a core value of mine that we take a holistic approach to this. I feel like if we abate and we do not do these other things, we are decreasing the effectiveness of abatement. We are just going in circles. Same with regard to overflow shelters.
Thank you, Ms. Alatel. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, my question is for Ms. Burke, and I would look to you and your team to advise us on what would be the correct ratio in terms of services, because it's not, and I'm not to speak for you, Mr. Chair, I know you put the 150,000 limit to get forward together, but it's not my intention that this would be independent from these other actions, but that my understanding is that Mr. Rada's staff is so far understaffed that I don't even know if it's commensurate with what we have in these other areas of services. So I would ask for your inputs on how those different pieces go together in terms of the final amount. Maybe not right here, but
Ms. Press.
And to respond to what Ms. LaFrance said, and to the crafters of most of these amendments, I think that everybody knows that there are sort of different silos of activity that we can do here. There's, housing and treatment. There's overflow shelter. There's abatement, which is getting the people to leave the camps, and then there's cleanup, which is cleaning up after the camps have been abated. So the abatement process may not need additional funding, but the cleanup does need additional funding. If you have a large camp that takes 5 days to clean up, then Rada's crew is going to be on there the whole week. So if the goal is to change the way the landscape looks, then cleanup is the location that needs to be directed. But you cannot abate additional camps unless the overflow shelter and the capacity exists. So if the goal is to make the biggest impact, and Nancy, correct me if I'm wrong here, you would want to direct the funds in those 2 places. The MIT then sort of is the middle piece that connects the continuum of care and makes sure that people are getting into the places that they need to be.
Thank you, Ms. Press. Mr. Dunbar.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify something I said. I didn't want to imply that the makers of the First Amendment that was abatement only were acting immorally. It's certainly not the case. To be read from my statement, but I think this is all happening in a much broader context where we know that there are all these different pots of funds. And I think we all know that almost all of them are underfunded, which is why most of us supported an alcohol tax that would have allowed us to make probably transformational change this summer and this coming year. Actually, well, it wouldn't have gone into effect until 2020, but in the coming years. And so I just wanted to get that out there and say also that I think we should take another run at the alcohol tax. That's a conversation for another day.
Here, Mr. Douglas. Mr. Constant.
Yeah, and I can't disagree with that last statement. I think it's wise for us to put together a strategy on that question. But I would offer for my amendment on that when I say abatement, I mean everything up until the point when the individual enters shelter. That includes visit from APD 10 days before, all the postings, then cleared out, plus all the cleanup, and then once that point that's taken care of, once you move people off the land, the shelter process to me is inclusive of all of the human needs that come with the process of moving people. So for my purposes, for definitional reasons, to me, there isn't a difference between abatement and cleanup. I understand there is on your end, and I'll be more careful in the future. But my intent is half for the breaking down and cleaning up and getting everyone off the land, half for all those other things.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Ms. Prowse.
And through the chair to Mr. Constant, I agree that we I think generally understand the intent of most of the amendments, but legally we want to make sure that we're putting the money where the drafter intended it to go. So having that conversation or making it clear in the amendment is helpful. It is also helpful to have that conversation on the record so it can be referential as long as it's there.
Thank you, Ms. Prowse. Anything further on the Zalatow amendment?
Can I ask a question?
Sure, Ms. McGinnis.
So Suzanne, I think, was asking for a specific breakdown. Is based on what you said sort of qualitatively, it feels like Meg's is a pretty good breakdown of that ratio. Would you agree with that?
I would agree, yeah. I think that we would want to take all of these amendments back after this session and have a conversation and sort of take the temperature on what the Assembly is looking for so that we can move in the same direction. Because there are so many of them that are focused in this area, I think it would be a pretty constructive conversation to figure out which one makes the most sense, what's the best direction to go.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McGinnis. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through the chair to Ms. Browse. And I would say, yes, like my intent is to respond to what you're hearing from the public and constituents to have continued forward action in this area, and however the distribution of the resources needs to be. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. LaFrance. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move on to Mr. Dyson's amendment.
Yeah, thank you. Please excuse me if I get carried away. Rape and sexual abuse in our community and state is huge, passionate issue for me. And my immediate family is dealing with the impact on a rape victim is 30 years ago. I'm still living with that. So I made 3 attempts to work off our rape kit backlog since I joined the Assembly. First time it was clumsy, and I wanted to fund it from fund balance. It was resoundingly turned down. Last year, I wanted to do it with, that one was not well crafted but I wanted to use the $800,000 roughly that goes to downtown Flowers to divert some of that to working down the DNA analysis of the rape kits. This year, I have had extensive conversations with the state and the crime lab and so on. And I think 13 years ago, the city used a grant to fund a position in the state crime lab to work strictly on rape kits DNA analysis for APD and ran out of funds. So the director of the crime lab, and I believe with the approval of the state commissioner of public safety, would be glad for us to fund a position there who would be a state employee funded by us to make a priority of working on the DNA kits, mostly rape kits, at the lab. That avoids us having to recruit and train and certify an operator and get our own equipment and certify our lab. That's all been done by the state. They have the equipment, they have the space, and so on. So, and I put $130,000 on it. Actually, the director of the lab said 120 was the all-in cost for administration, benefits, and so on for that.
All right. So I have everyone in the queue. So starting with Mr. Constant.
Yeah, I wonder, a couple of years ago, maybe it was last year, we worked out a deal with the state prosecutor's office in which we provided some assets from APD, and the state provided us with a dedicated prosecutor, and it worked out for no additional cost really that we were able to achieve this relationship you're talking about. And I wonder if there are some other structures within our employment system that we could work with the folks in their crime lab and our resources that we have readily available, and we could achieve that and maybe even more with this. Because if you remember that circumstance, we now have a state prosecutor working specifically on recidivist sex crimes and DV issues only. And what we paid for that is allowing them to direct cases through our investigators. I believe that was how it worked out. No, wasn't that something along those lines? Ms. Browse has specific knowledge. Anyhow, I like the look and feel of this because it's a number that's consumable and it's a single job, and it seems like we could be creative. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you. Is there anybody from APD here?
Oh, no.
Right. Bill, are you an officer?
You could have a car if you wanted.
Health Commissioner.
Okay, great. Do you want to just speak to it first, or I have specific questions for you too?
Yes, to the chair. So this came up last year, and I want to make sure the body is clear. So I emailed with the chief again to reconfirm this. And the position of the police department is an amendment like this would have no impact on the sex assault kits. All of them get sent outside to be tested. We don't do it ourselves. The state doesn't do it ourselves. And we are in the process of testing all of the backlog kits, regardless of whether we think they have any evidentiary value. Hopefully by the end of the year or early next year, we will have 0 backlog kits on hand, because the state funded that effort in sending them all outside. All the new kits that we send over now do get tested, so we're just working through the backlog through the 90s. The police department is exploring the idea of whether we should embed someone in the state crime lab, because it would be nice to have some additional non-sex assault kit DNA testing capacity. But we would want to have pretty strong understanding memorandums with them that if we fund a position, we don't lose control, and now we're just funding all of the DNA results that are coming out of Kodiak and whatnot. I also will say that the police department is interested in this, but I think if they had an extra $30,000, they would probably buy some more dispatchers and some other people before they went for this arrangement, so we can figure that out. But the sex assault kit thing I know is of high interest, and it's high interest to us too. Nobody wants old sex assault kits or new sex assault kits lingering. But as we said last year, and which has remained the case as confirmed by the police chief, that problem has a solution already, and that this wouldn't materially advance that solution.
So that, thank you for that. And that was, so Fred, the way you described why the amendment failed last year, I don't think was my understanding. My understanding was that when we had testimony from APD, they said, we are doing this, but there are other time constraints involved. I thought it was a state grant as well, maybe I'm mistaken, and this is happening. And so that's why I didn't support it. And so I guess I'm sort of caught in a vice here, because I want to support you in your goal, and I like what you're trying to do, but it sounds like that this won't do what APD says is going to happen. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So I want to be careful and got to somebody in trouble. The information I've just had is utterly not true in general. And they, in my opinion, and people I've talked to, they don't want to get anybody in trouble, so on. And part of it is the timeliness of it. And the investigators are telling me it's always more than a month, and often 4 months before they get the result back, you know, in chasing a particular suspect. And so that's an issue. And I have very different information on when our backlog gets settled here, and I hope Mr. Falsey exactly right. That's certainly not the information I have, and certainly not the information I believe I got from the director of the crime lab.
Can I ask a follow-up to that, Mr. Rivera? So if the 1 to 4 months for these new cases are we sure that this position would accelerate that? Because if they are being sent outside, is the choke point what's happening here in Alaska, or is it the fact that we send it out to Texas? I think in the case of the National Guard, we send our UAs to Texas, for example, and then we just get it back whenever they get it back to us.
Yeah. This was provide for getting processed here, and our police would decide the priority of those cases. Cold cases and so on and so forth get slid back if we've got one that came in last night that needs to be dealt with. And there would be a memorandum of understanding, and the police, the public safety folks, and the prosecutors in the state are not bad people. They're not looking for a chance to take advantage of the poor suckers in Anchorage by getting them to fund a guy to work on their thing. Sure, we're all a little selfish, a little bit parochial, but I think that's a straw argument. You know, that what we do need, as Bill says, a good memorandum of understanding. And so, yeah, and I realize that your vote against this sort of thing last year was a more principled one than I assumed. I thought that most of you all were just overwhelmed by the flower children that showed up. And you notice, pardon my anger, there was no one there testifying on behalf of the highest rape ratio in the nation. And who's there for those victims? You know, and I appreciate people's interest in flowers and looking good. But if you've ever dealt with rape victims, and almost 3/4 of the 24 foster kids I had, you know, were all rape victims that exploited in this state. A lifetime sentence. I'm sorry, I'm preaching, but we don't have people standing up to testify on behalf of the victims. And I think this will make a profound difference. It's been in our papers. Just yesterday, a guy being extricated on a cold case came from a DNA sample. Wanted to sit on the shelves for 30 years.
So I guess I just need, I don't know if it's possible by Tuesday, but I need this information from APD or whatever it is, Bill. I need to know, one thing I need to know is how long does it take it, when we send it out, how long does it take it to come back? And would this help accelerate it at the state, the crime lab? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Ms. Preps.
And to clarify for Mr. Dunbar's point through the chair, I think that the probably reason for 2 points of information that differ is because we are talking to the city and Mr. Dyson is talking to the state, correct?
No.
You're talking to the city.
I don't want to get anybody in trouble.
No, you're not. I just want to make sure that we're directing the clarity in the right way so that we can figure out why the sort of disconnect occurs.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Preps. Ms. Zolotel.
I was just going to ask if Chief Dahl will be at our meeting on Tuesday. I think that would be helpful.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Yeah, but let me just respond. The question of the timing is, we got somebody here can start the meeting, the sample comes in and go through the lab process. All the equipment is here. At least you're going to save the shipping time going from. But wherever we're sending them outside, it gets in their queue with thousands from other places.
Wait, I was under the impression that we do not have the capacity to do DNA testing.
That's right, we do not.
State
Well, the state has, and they take all the priorities for the whole state.
I think there's some misunderstanding here. I thought we do some kind of initial processing, but then it has to be sent out of state to do the actual DNA test.
So I think Mr. Constant might be able to help.
Yeah, so I actually have a friend who is one of the DNA testers at the state crime lab. And so they do have the capacity. I've been through, if you haven't been on the tour, you ought to do the tour. It's quite eye-opening. And the DNA lab is state-of-the-art. It's just limited in capacity.
So this, in your opinion, would accelerate?
I can't speak to the facts of what resources are available, or what the demand is, or what the state's demand is, or any of that stuff, but I can speak to the fact that I know the state crime lab has this capacity. It's just one room within the 3 floors of their major operation.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. All right, Mr. Slipka, then I will get to Ms. Alto.
Just a reminder that the bond issue of $3.5 million that was passed in April was specifically focused on expanding this capacity, and that the police department's going to start implementing that.
May I respond to that?
I will put you in the queue. Thank you, Ms. Alto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. why do we send out the DNA? I'm using a little historical context here. Is it just capacity? Is that simply, Mr. Falsey, can you maybe elucidate?
Chair, I don't know, and I don't have perfect clarity on this arrangement, but before Tuesday, I will figure out perfect clarity. Bring me that answer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Salatel. Mr. Whittleton.
Continuing on that, so, I mean, this proposes to fund a position here, but we, for some reason, send these out, and is it possible to, I mean, if you want to get as much bang for the buck, maybe we can send it to these companies, but say, this is a priority, not just, you know, if you have a cold case, you don't tell them, you know, 4 or 5 months may be fine, but if you got something hot and new, because you get things overnight mail pretty quick, you get something down there in 4 hours. But I'd be curious there, if they're different, instead of funding a position, we say maybe we'll put some money towards expediting, you know, hot cases now. And then it may be hire someone, or it may just be a priority service.
Thank you, Mr. Whittleton. Ms. Broski.
My question kind of touched on Dunbar's question, because I remember it was either 2 years ago or a couple of years ago, Representative Garantar proposed a bill that would basically fast track all of the old rape kits, and I'm pretty sure it passed, and that's kind of what I was touching on. How is that being used with our rape kits that are older and coming in still? So, yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Broski. So I have Mr. Dyson, then Mr. Constant.
Yeah, so in the stuff that was appended to your this submittal, I had 3 proposals, or different proposals from the director of the crime lab. One is we do what I said here. Secondly, the state puts some of their space is now used for storage in the crime lab to allow the police department to put their lab there. As you would intuit, lab environments are significantly more rigorous than just storage space. Or thirdly, the city get their own crime lab. That means they've got to buy equipment that's hundreds of thousands of dollars. They've got to make a lab, clean lab space with the security that it needs. Then they've got to find, train, and certify the staff, and then they got to get their lab certified. Orders of magnitude more expensive, and takes many, many months, if not years, to get it done. That's why, as Mr. Constant said, this is far and away both gets it done and for a reasonable starting point on doing it.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Mr. Constant.
So I would just add that it seems if the body, whichever way the body goes on this, we get the analysis and have understanding of facts and figures from the perspective of the administration, it could be that there is a short-term opportunity here, because we do know that there was a bond funded to reconstruct the police department headquarters to create just such a lab, along with a variety of other tools that is in queue, and that may or may not be reasonable or responsible because of the cost, but it is in queue. And so it could be, if the body is so moved and there is a determined need, that we fund it for a period of year while we wait to see our own facilities created. You know, and if I understand any way our correction system works and our kind of public safety is, we send much of our materials to the state because the state is the clearinghouse for these things. And so there is a middle road here.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. All right, I don't see any further discussion. Thank you, Mr. Dyson.
Just say, Chris is right, but that's something we could have in place in weeks, you know, and then we would have that certified guy available for next. But it's still hundreds of thousands of dollars for the lab equipment, the lab space, probably closer to $1 million. And I think the chief would say, if this pressing need was met in another way, there's a whole lot of better ways to spend that several $100,000 or $1 million, and it happens. And once again, pardon my passion, but if we all decide not to do this, then my second solution is that we talk about not doing something else, i.e. downtown flowers, or my best submission is that we as the assembly cancel our transportation budget and our food, the two of those about 50,000. Each of us volunteer to contribute from our 25,000 salary and 10,000 expense some amount, and my wife and I will double whatever the average of what you do. If that doesn't work, I'll ask the administration to take everybody that makes over 100,000 and have them give 10% of the month amount over 100,000 to see if we, the leadership, can actually show the people that we can care about the sexual assault rate and getting these guys off the street. So, sorry, done preaching.
Thank you for your passion, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Well, no? Okay. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move on to amendment number 4. Ms. Broski and Mr. Constant.
Thank you. So this amendment basically gives $5,000 to the Artway Initiative to create more community art projects, especially targeted towards youth. And we see that with the recent trash cans that were painted and put out, it definitely helps. There's a positive response towards that. And we see that it's been a great reaction from the community. And I kind of just wanted to give some statistics about youth and community and art. So a study that was done in Australia by the Big Heart Project showed that community art events specifically targeted towards youth increase the feeling of strengthened sense of community and better mental health stuff. And then another study done by Terry K. Peterson from Expanding Minds and Opportunity found that after-school art programs actually encourage kids to be more passionate about school and encourages them to learn. So these are just some statistics that show that youth and art in the community can help them towards school and towards just community involvement in general. So that's a simple breakdown. If Mr. Constant has anything else to add.
Could you say it better?
All right. Any questions on this one? So I did have one question on the funding. So if I'm reading this correctly, this would be $5,000 from the Assembly's budget?
So I can speak to that. When I was working with somebody that helped me craft up this language a bit, it came across with a statement that the Assembly will fund this opportunity. And so I had intended to leave it in that amorphous category of fund balance, and then we could have a conversation with the administration. But Desiree was very diligent in her read of my words and took me at my word. And so that's what happened. And so I don't care to backtrack if the body is comfortable. If we have it, I asked Barbara to tell me, are we going to break the bank if we do this? And she said, maybe your bank. And I don't have that much bank. So we can have that conversation on Tuesday. What and where and how is the best. And I don't know what the protocol is, but it's my hope that Ms. Broski gets to move this as an action of the member.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Constant. Thank you, Ms. Broski. I don't see any further questions on this one. So we'll go ahead and move on to my other amendment. So this amendment is $10,000. We can just say, for the purposes of discussion, this is for fund balance. And this amendment specifically deals with an issue. And Dick, are you here? Okay, great. You can answer any historical questions if I don't get it right. So this deals with an issue that the Federation of Community Councils and all of our community councils has been dealing with, which is the issue of insurance and having insurance and needing insurance in order for them to host their meetings. It has been apparently an assumption that the Federation has made for some time that they fall under the municipality's insurance policy, but in fact they do not. They met with risk management several times, and because they are technically not agents of the city, that they do not fall under the municipality's insurance. So in order for them to meet this next season, they need to have this insurance. And what I was told for this year, for the rest of 2019, that total was $10,000. So Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so, if I understand correctly, the community councils that actually meet in school district buildings would not need insurance. Is that correct?
School district buildings are municipally owned buildings, so they wouldn't need insurance.
They would not need.
No, they would.
Oh, they would?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right, because we had our Northeast Community Council meeting last night. It's in a church in East Anchorage, and so since it's a privately owned building, we assumed that they would definitely need the insurance. And this sort of all started at the Northeast Community Council a couple months
Yes,
ago.
it did. Yes, it did. Thank you. Mr. Trainee, again, you can correct me, but it's the assumption that the Federation is making that to cover their rear ends, they want insurance for all of their meetings, regardless if it's on private or otherwise.
Okay, thank you.
Really? One comment. The charter recognizes community councils.
Yes.
As part of the foundation. They're in the charter, but risk management says you're not covered by our insurance policy. So they really don't have the ability to raise money, tax themselves to do this. If we don't fund them, they'll cease to exist. Because who's going to want to work for an organization, community council, that gives you liability? Going out.
Thank you. And actually, I want to just acknowledge I've handed over the gavel to Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. So we
Thank you,
have
ma'am.
Ms. Quinn Davidson, Ms. Zelatel, Mr. Dunbar, and Mr. Constant, and Mr. Weddleton in the queue. So Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thanks. I was going to ask what is the relationship with community councils to the Muni? I mean, I don't think we're particularly in the business of funding entities that aren't Muni entities, but it sounds like they might be. So
I can.
Okay. It always funds community councils. And if we didn't, they might cease to exist.
Correct.
That would be a horror.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Rivera would like to respond.
Yes, so the municipality, by creating the charter says we have these community councils. So it is in the interpretation of the Federation that because we created the community councils through the charter, that we should therefore be responsible for this.
And we're sure that the insurance can't cover it? I mean, if they're muni, and
Yes.
why?
Through the chair, this was part of the conversation at the FCC that's been going on for months. On Wednesday, their board had the conversation about how they are working through the details to make sure that all of their meetings and public events are covered by insurance. Based on the information that risk management has given them, they are in this bind for 2019 in particular. Mr. Rivera and Mr. Trainee suggested that this could be an option while they sort out the problems and actually figure out exactly how much and when the notice has to occur and how the insurance has to cover them. So hopefully this is a one-time expense that will be sorted out by the time the 2020 budget proposal comes around.
Okay, and that's a good segue into, I was going to ask, if we do this for 2019, what happens in 2020? I mean, I don't sort of want to get in the habit of, if there are other solutions like Mr. Peterson brought up, like let's have them meet in a different space. Does that work? It seemed like there was a little confusion whether that does. So if whoever's asking for this can figure out those questions.
I think the goal is to explore that with risk management and municipality.
While we're funding them
Yes.
in 2019. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. Ms. Zelatel?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chair. What does or where does an insurance requirement come from? Is it just a desire, or is this like in their documents, in their bylaws? Are they going to put it in if they do get insurance, so that way it's just something they're like out in front of from now on?
Mr. Rivera, do you want to?
So it's my understanding that it is not in their bylaws, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is a desire. Like I said earlier, they just want to make sure that they are in the clear, just in case.
They who?
They, the community councils. Yes, thank you.
Can I do a quick follow-up? They, the community councils, so would this be a policy then that was for the Federation that was then assigned to the community councils, or each community council would be, so the Federation would be named and each community council would also be named as a covered insured entity?
So the Federation, I understand, has its own insurance policy. This would be for all of the various 30-something odd community councils.
Thank you, Ms. Zelatel. Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Mr. Dunbar?
Yeah, I think Meg just hit on most of my question, my sort of skepticism with this. Knowing where it started and sort of why it started. It seems like a lot of people have gotten wrapped around the axle, but the community councils have to exist, but I don't know if the Federation of Community Councils is spelled out in the charter. The Federation is what we fund. We give them a certain number of $60,000 or $70,000 a year, and they have a full-time employee and then another part-time employee, and then I guess you've said they have a lease, and I guess they have insurance as well. But the Federation of Community Councils is not the community councils. They are how do you say it? Each community council is their own little entity, and so I'm skeptical that you could get an appropriate insurance policy that would cover all the little activities of all those little organizations and then filter it through the FCC. And at the same time, I do kind of wonder why is insurance needed at all in this case? I mean, these are tiny little nonprofits. Let's say it's a slip and fall or something like that. If you were to sue that entity, there's no funds there. They're default proof. And I don't think, to me, it doesn't make sense that you could pierce that veil and go after the people in their individual capacity. So the whole thing, I'm skeptical of the whole enterprise.
So I am going to phone a friend, Miss Gleason, if you can, please. Could you speak specifically to some of the questions Mr. Dunbar raised?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Members of the Assembly. Kathy Gleason, I'm president of Turnagain Community Council, and I am also the Turnagain's delegate member, so I was at the meeting last Wednesday. And probably the chances of something happening when all of our little groups meet, whether it's a monthly meeting or we're doing a cleanup along a road or we're having a summer picnic or all the myriad other events that individual councils take on, the chances are small that we would have something that would happen where we would need liability insurance. But it can happen, and I think that's where we're at now. Do we want to remain vulnerable, and would it scale back what some councils feel like they felt comfortable doing all these years, but then maybe we won't do that cleanup anymore? And I think the community it would be a loss for the community cumulatively if you just kind of felt like our councils aren't really worth it in terms of finding some way for us to be insured in that case. I mean, it was this example for Turnagain, it was sponsored through the Parks Department. We coordinated the event with the Parks Department, so it wasn't applicable. But we had a work party a few years ago down at Lanier Memorial Garden, and somebody cut their hand pretty severely while we were doing some tree planting, and shovels were involved, and loppers and so forth. And he had to be taken to the emergency room. Unfortunately, nothing ever came of it. I don't believe the Parks Department was sued. We certainly weren't sued as a council. But things can happen. And so I guess it's up to this body, the validity of the risk that council should take or would want to take now that this is kind of becoming a known entity. We were operating under the radar, I think, and naive, but now that it's come to light, that may scale back what councils do.
Thank you, Ms. Gleason. Ms. Browse, do you want to comment? And
Just
we'll have to move quickly
just to potentially add some clarity to this through the chair, and to add on to what Ms. Gleason said, and if I say something that you know to be incorrect, please correct me. My understanding is that the FCC currently has insurance covering their activities. This $10,000 would add their coverage to all of the community councils under the FCC. So they would then be covered by the FCC's coverage. What Ms. Gleason was saying is anytime they take an activity onto municipal property, if that entity doesn't have insurance, the municipality is liable for anything that happens. If it is sponsored by a municipal department, then we have already agreed to be the liability to cover that event. But many community councils have events that have no municipal sponsorship, that happen on private property, and those are requirements for insurance coverage. So in order to get that drop down on all of those events that occur for these community councils, the FCC needs additional funding to expand their coverage.
Thank you, Ms. Browse. We have 4 people in the queue, and we have 3 minutes left for this meeting.
And 1 more minute.
And 1 more minute. Is there anything else? We had Constant Welton, Peterson, and Zalazal.
Yep, a few things, I'll be quick. Do we know 10,000 is enough is the first question. I don't know where that number came from, whether it will purchase policy. And just to clarify, the councils are recognized. The ability for them to be recognized is created in the charter. We didn't create a single council, we never will. And some of this points to a bylaws adjustment, and that is a conversation that I'm interested in starting. We just finished a 6-year process, and it's like we're back at the beginning again. I want to get that on the table.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Weddleton?
That's all right.
Okay. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And my question is, if a community council has no assets, why would someone sue them? You can't get blood out of a turnip. You know, if they are meeting on a municipal site, then the muni might have liability. But if they're meeting in a local church, what would the church have liability? I don't know. I'm not the lawyer.
Ms. Brass, you'd like to respond?
Through the chair, to answer Mr. Constant's question, the number comes from Mark Butler, who has investigated this whole process with their insurance carrier to make sure that the coverage is enough.
Just a super quick follow-up. If that's the case, I'd like to see the statement that establishes that before we vote.
And Mr. Slivka wanted to add
I
something?
just want to add, if you want to have any activity at school district property, you have to have liability insurance.
And through the chair, to Mr. Peterson's question, the community councils may not have deep pockets, but the municipality sure does.
Thank you, Ms. Brass.
That's what I was worried about.
Gavel back to Mr. Rivera.
All right, so with the remaining 1 minute, we're going to do amendment number 7, France, Weddleton, Constant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so this amendment proposes funding 2 grants out of the Assembly Department to support area plan updates, the first for Girdwood, the second for South Addition. You may recall some of the members from last year who were here, we appropriated $12,000 as a grant to Girdwood Inc., which is the nonprofit piece, which the community supplemented with a Heritage Land Bank matching grant and local donations. And this appropriation enabled the community to contract with Huddle for Phase 1 to provide project management, public outreach, a professional survey. The community would like to now continue with Phase 2 of this project, and a $20,000 grant would enable them to maintain their momentum and to leverage for fundraising as well. The overall project cost is probably between $60,000 and $80,000, and the plan is 25. Their existing plan is 25 years old. They're about 25 years old, so this is much needed. And then perhaps Mr. Constant speak to the second part.
Yeah, so I received a call from folks that requested that I contemplate joining the ordinance or the amendment. And the South Addition Community Council is working on a neighborhood plan. They're really struggling right now, and so there's back and forth conversation, or maybe some resources would help them move forward to the next step, or maybe it would cause things to explode. I don't know the answer to that question, and but I am supportive of them seeing some kind of aid, even if it was money directed to the planning department for them to be able to have additional staff that were available to help this project. And I added a little phrase in there that gets to my previous comment about bylaws changes. These folks tend to write a lot of resolutions regarding bylaws, or Title 21. And they come out real sneaky at the last minute. Like, their rules allow for an immediate laying on the table of a resolution no one's ever seen. And it, to me, is very unfair to those who might disagree. And so I wanted to make a policy statement for this funding that anything related to Title 21 they bring forward needs to sit, if it's a resolution, for 30 days for us to recognize it. It doesn't mean they have to change their bylaws. They can still have a free conversation, but for us to hear these big policy recommendations, we need to know their neighbors have had a chance to comment. And so that's why I added that line.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Ms. LaFrance.
And may I just add that this amount would be taken from fund balance and transferred into the Assembly's budget for the grant award. Thank you.
Is there a line?
There is not, but we are out of time. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Okay. Oh, sounds like it's South Addition's turn. Why Girdwood? Why not others?
Mr. Chair?
Sure.
Girdwood has been working on their area plan update for several years now, and is at a place where they will make very good use of this support. And we actually consulted with Ms. McNulty as well to see if there were any other districts that have communities that are actively working on plans and are in a good place where they would could use support and provide value.
And she said no, other than these?
Correct.
If I might quickly on that, if I were facing a forced choice question and I had to say either or, Girdwood is better positioned to capitalize on the investment at this time because they're orderly, organized, and running forward. I believe South Edition could use the help. If I were forced to choose, even though I represent the downtown in South Edition, I can support that project because they are really into the work now, and that's where our resources could best aid. And so, just as an honest forced choice question.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. Mr. Littleton, just real quick.
Girdwood is highly leveraged, and this is 20,000. They get 50, 60, 70, 80, huge amounts of money because they fundraise amongst themselves. So this is a small amount compared to being said. But I would say that South Edition is really critical. So a lot of our upcoming code changes, redefining some of our zoning and so on, it's them.
Yep.
So we need to give them some way to give us feedback. I think this is a fairly small amount. It really helps to have a professional guide the effort.
And I would second that.
Thank you, Mr. Littleton. Thank you, Mr. Conson. So last question to Ms. Browse. So when should we expect the administration to get back to the members on incorporating some of those amendments?
Tuesday.
Tuesday at 4:59.
Depends on the order we decide to call everyone in. I don't have an exact time. Before Tuesday, yes.
Okay.
I mean, we'll go back, take this information, look at it today, and depending on how quickly we can work things through, it could be later this afternoon, ideally Monday.
Great. Thank you. All right, so this work session is over now.